Psych in Business podcast, where we highlight the integration of psychology and psychological principles into the world of business and organizations. I am your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde, and today I'm very excited to introduce you to one of my favorite people in the world. She played a key role in my professional development through coaching and mentoring while she was my boss and kept on supporting me even after I moved on. She's a rock star in my book, and I'm thrilled to have her on the show. She's my friend, Dr. Jill Draime. Dr. Draime serves as the Executive Director, Change Management for the Veteran Health Administration, Office of Healthcare Transformation. As Executive Director, Dr. Draime oversees policies, strategies, and execution of organizational change management and leads the transformation vision, stakeholder engagement, change impact in organizational readiness, and communications regarding organizational impact. She received her doctorate degree from Spalding University in 1998. Dr. Draime is a graduate of Wharton's Advanced Management Program. Dr. Draime has served in numerous roles of progressive responsibility across her career since starting with VA in 1998. Prior to this appointment, Dr. Draime served as Executive Director, Change Management for VA's Electronic Health Record Modernization Integration Office. In this role, she provided vision and direction for the Office of Change Management and developed strategies for execution of change management, training strategy for all VA staff who will work in modernization EHR, site communications, stakeholder engagement, and advanced level analytics and informatics training to ensure staff have the skills and competencies to optimize a modernized EHR. Prior to her role in EHRIO, she served as acting VHA Chief of Staff and Deputy Chief of Staff. In the Chief of Staff role, she served as an advisor to the Undersecretary for Health, representing the Undersecretary in high-level negotiations involving the establishment or implementation of policies, practices, management, and operational activities of VHA. From 2013 to 2017, Dr. Draime served as Vice President, President-elect, President, and past President for the Society of Psychologists in Leadership, a nonprofit organization focused on the support and advancement of psychologists serving in managerial and leadership roles. Wow, Jill, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ernest. I'm so excited to be here. It's always funny to hear your career path outlined for you, but I'm excited to share just my experiences in terms of what drew me to psychology and how I don't know how anybody can either not be a psychologist as a leader, or have a psychologist right next to you as a leader, or have a psychologist on speed dial as a leader. So excited to share my perspective over that span of my career.
Excellent. I'm so excited to hear about your career, Jill, because I know you personally, and you were just an amazing person. So I'm so glad that everyone else gets to hear from you. So let's start with what you talked about in terms of your career. How did you go from being a psychologist to working in the VA and at very high levels of leadership in the VA, actually?
Yeah, so I came into VA as a psychology intern, which many psychologists do. It's a great place to really, one, it's an incredibly mission-driven organization, and I was very excited to be able to come in to VA as an intern. I will tell you I don't know if other psychologists can relate to this, but I've wanted to be a psychologist since I was in the 11th grade in high school. And human beings are fascinating. I just love everything about them, and I just find them so interesting.
Absolutely.
And they're who make up our world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Agree.
So I'm a clinical psychologist by background. I'm tens of thousands of dollars in debt from going to graduate school, and was like, I don't think I can do psychotherapy, day in and day out. So I don't know what I thought I was doing. But yeah, it's like I always say, every psychologist should have at least one good existential crisis in your life, and that was my first. So a lot of what's happened in my career has been serendipity. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. and have, like you, have had people who in my life have led me along the way. But I was very fortunate to one of my internship rotations was in organization development, and I fell in love. It was the place where I could marry um, my my psychology
Mm-hmm.
theory
Mm-hmm.
and what I had learned into practice, but on a much larger scale. I mean, we were talking about, groups of people and systems and
Yeah.
organizations as a whole and how they function. And so that is what really drew me to, move, uh, plus my existential crisis, but to move out of thinking of, doing psychology in its purest form, of being a psychologist clinician, to really trying to impact the system from a broader
Mm-hmm.
perspective. But all of the things that I learned in terms of assessment, intervention, evaluation, kind of coaching versus therapy, all of that was super
Yeah.
familiar. Like that was, I was like, oh, I know how to do this. So there wasn't what felt like a dramatic turn. I felt like, okay, I'm prepared for this. Like I know how to do
Yeah.
assessment. I know how to think about how to intervene, but how to intervene around, again, using that psychology
Mm-hmm.
lens, to really try to impact a work environment, because maybe other different people's experiences. But being an OD consultant, people were not looking you up and saying, "Hey, my workforce is great and everybody's happy and life is good. Can you come in, and intervene?" It was always because there were morale issues, there were, interpersonal conflicts, there were leadership issues, and so again, everything that I had learned through, professional psychology
Mm-hmm.
training was all applicable as I started to do OD work. And so I did that for many years. The first probably about 14, 15 years of my career. And then I got the opportunity to go up into the
Mm-hmm.
C-suite and be the acting deputy chief of staff, and then the acting chief of staff for VHA. I have an incredibly supportive husband, and I said, "Hey, honey, because we live not in DC, Washington D.C., and I said, "Hey, would you be okay if I did this 4 month? It'll just be 4 months, honey." And I was there for 2 years,
Right.
yeah, so it's like, thanks, honey. He was very, very supportive in that. But so I took the opportunity to. I had been a leader of
Mm-hmm.
psychologists, so I was in a managerial role. But wow, was this like leap to the big leagues? It was sort of like I was minor league
Yeah.
pitcher, and then it was like I got called up.
You got called up to the big leagues.
I was called up to the big leagues, and it just so happened that I was there. So living in DC, and it was about 3 to 4 weeks I was there, and this was 2014. And there was a hearing where we had one of our congressional members um, start what ended up being a really significant
Mm-hmm.
crisis in the organization around veteran
Mm-hmm.
access. And so it was probably the first time. So I was acting deputy chief of staff at the time, and then 8 months later became acting chief of staff. It was really, really the first time in my career, because in organization development, I was working around psychologists. We were an office of psychologists. I was supervising
Yeah.
psychologists,
Psychology of
but
the
it
world.
was
Yeah.
around psychologists. And now I'm in this leadership role, and I'm thinking, oh, I'll just be here for 4 months, to really gain a different experience. And all of a sudden, smack, we're in the middle of a very high profile, very anxiety provoking
Mm.
experience in terms of an access crisis that lasted for pretty much the entire time I was in the C-suite. So again, it was the first time, and I know I was using all those psychology skills
Hmm.
before, but now truly like looking through a lens of saying, okay, like this is a really, again, incredibly anxiety provoking time when you're in a crisis,
Hmm.
and everything just like, you want to talk about going to the down, to the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, you're like, food, shelter,
Yeah.
water, and so just trying to help people to navigate that through, everything I learned in my psychology, um, schooling and
Hmm.
education was so applicable, just to try to help, uh, not only calm the waters, but also because my staff's freaking
Hmm.
out and the system is freaking out. So just how to help navigate through that
Hmm.
experience was, again, used every single solitary skill I had, and a lot of that really was around interpersonal
Mm.
relationships,
Yeah.
and how to just bring people together and say, we got this, we can do this, what's your part, what's my part. I mean, none of that is necessarily, nothing was like earth
Hmm.
shattering. But again, I think I was tuned into parts of people that sort of got, switched
Yeah.
on because of being in a crisis situation. Um, and then left there, and then had another position in between, and then went to the electronic health record modernization, which is also a whole nother, really transformational effort. Tons of lessons learned. I'm sure anybody who might be tuning into said podcast
Hmm.
might, if you follow the news and VA and how the rollout is going, been a lot of fits and
Yeah.
starts. And so again, uh, really use we have a change management model in the Veterans Health Administration that we follow, and we're following that just in terms of
Hmm.
intervention. But again, really understanding the psychology of where people are, and um, you know what this transformation was meaning to
Yeah.
them, was on a much, much, much deeper
Hmm.
level, I think,
Hmm.
than certainly than I even appreciated when I went into the position.
Absolutely.
um, but trying to move people when it was pretty deeply psychologically
Hmm.
rooted issues in terms of why we were struggling as an
Hmm.
organization. And finally, to the position I'm in now, which is the executive director for change management for the Veterans Health Administration, just having the opportunity to really um, embed change management, which is the people side
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
change, into how we do our business. And so, again, tending to, we all bring our quirky little selves to work,
Yeah.
right?
I know I
So
do.
how do we help? Yeah, how do we help not just our staff navigate change, but again, trying to bring that psychology background to say, sometimes even when you say we just had a recent enactment of a piece of legislation that's around military environmental
Hmm.
exposures, and it's like, of course, that's like, who wouldn't think that's a great
Yeah.
thing? And people do think it's a great thing, but it still requires human beings to do something
Hmm.
different than what they're doing now. And so anytime you're dealing, with human beings and human behavior, even when it's a good thing, you know, again, that's why I think psychologists are in an incredibly unique
Hmm.
position to help a workforce, help leaders who are over said workforce, to really not just understand staff as human beings, which we all want to do because we're caring souls, but to use that to understand, where human beings are at, so we can get the maximum out of us, in terms of
Hmm.
efficiency and productivity, for whatever customer it is that we serve. And in our case, we serve uh, um, to me, the most amazing group of individuals in terms of our veterans. So that's probably, I'll stop there, and I'm sure you have.
Yeah, that's such a rich background, Jill. There's just so much that I want to dig into there. I mean, you've talked about so many different things that I think really speak to what this podcast is about, right? In terms of working with people and the training that you received as a psychologist allowed you to do that, because as a psychologist, you're trained to deal with people, right? And so whether it be in the workplace or wherever, it's that smooth transition. But I really want to just pull on a thread that you were talking about, especially when you're working at those high levels, working in the VA, which is obviously in the public sector, but then also talking about the politics of it, right? Because in the VA, you have to deal a lot with politics, and at that very high level, you have to deal with politics on a daily basis. So I'm really interested to know, how did you navigate that? Because as a psychologist, you're not necessarily trained to do or deal with politics, but people are people, right? So how did you do that, and how did your psychological training help you with that?
Yeah, so in especially, I mean, true. I think it's true at all the levels that I operated at, but particularly when I was in the C-suite. There was politics with a big P,
Hmm.
and there were politics with a little p. And so politics with a big P, we had a lot of congressional interest,
Hmm.
obviously, because now we're talking about veterans maybe not getting timely
Hmm.
care. And so, really trying to, because a lot of those things of communications and legislation, all fall under the chief of
Hmm.
staff. So, one, it was I better get up to speed myself
Hmm.
quickly, from a content and leadership perspective. But again, most of it was, my staff, they knew what they were doing, right? I mean, not anything under this level of
Hmm.
spotlight. So part of it was, again, just to try to bring the temperature down, and help them. Like, again, I saw my job as, what connection do you need that you don't have? What barrier do you need removed that you can't remove
Hmm.
yourself? Um, and also making sure that, um, they were focused on what they needed to be focused
Hmm.
on. I tried to take the noise out of the way, and make sure that they understood the sense of urgency. But also at the same time, you can't give of yourself what you don't
Hmm.
have. And there was a temptation, you just work harder, pedal faster, because that was, where we were, in the crisis in the swirl. So trying to, again, doing anything from, um, again, these aren't like techniques that anybody else couldn't
Hmm.
do, but it was things that I knew, both by observation and by a lot of just sitting with people and talking with them and understanding, okay, you can't get this done. So normally you're like, I don't care what it takes, get it
Right.
done. To trying to understand, okay, step me through it. Why not? What's getting in the way? And sometimes those things were professional, and sometimes those things are
Hmm.
personal. People who themselves, had illness or illness in their family, or all kinds of life circumstances. Because again, we don't leave our home lives at the door when we come to
Yeah.
work. And so again, trying to get at, some of the root of what was, if there was, difficulties to be overcome, why couldn't we overcome them, and what was getting in the
Hmm.
way. So, I feel like at least bringing, that, um, I want to use sort of the word, and probably not the best word, but sort of the
Hmm.
maturity, of psychological
Yeah. Yeah.
mindedness to that situation, I think helped in terms of and in some ways actually helped them to say, um, okay, because people know what psychologists are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they know that they know that they're tend to be human-centered people,
Hmm.
and so even that I think helps a lot. Just to say, if I have to fake it till I make it, I
Yeah.
will. But that I have something to offer on the human
Hmm.
side that others might not bring to the table, just because that's not their background. So that I think even just having that title,
Hmm.
and people knowing that the doctor in front of my name was a psychologist
Hmm.
versus other types of doctors, I actually think helped a lot. Just from knowing what I was bringing to the table. So I would say that you know that was sort of the big P
Hmm.
politics of just navigating all of the congressional interest, media interest, interest from lots of the influx of veteran calls,
Yeah. Just the politics, the
people
big
were
P of that, right?
worried,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I mean, and if I thought I wasn't getting, timely care, I would be anxious too.
Hmm.
So we were trying to sort of get into the mindset of our
Hmm.
stakeholders, and really supplying for them what it was that they might be worried about, concerned about, thinking
Hmm.
about, and proactively supply that to the extent that we could. And then, we had a lot of little p
Hmm.
politics. Uh, and when you're not in a crisis and things function the way they function, typically they work. You may have some things that don't work as efficiently as they should, or whatever. That gets super highlighted
Hmm.
when you're in a crisis. And so, again, trying to deal with what some of those flaws that were showing
Hmm.
themselves, inefficiencies that were showing themselves, people who themselves were really struggling to handle a crisis in their
Hmm.
role. We ended up with a lot of kind of
Yeah.
inter-office politics. We were dealing with politics inside of our own department. I mean,
Yeah.
agency. So we were sort of dealing with things from the inside, and sort of what got surfaced because of that crisis, and what it's shown a spotlight on
Hmm.
internally, as well as that spotlight externally. So we were really sort of, I felt like I was trying to help manage things on both fronts.
But that's one of the things that I really appreciate about you, Jill, is that when we're talking about that small P in terms of the small politics, I've seen you because I was on your team, and I've seen you treat everybody like an individual and really give them the care and attention, which I really appreciate. But I've also seen you work with some really difficult leaders who you needed to work with, or you needed to get something from it, and be able to have those tough conversations with them, but also do it in a way that you know made them want to be a part of the team. I just really appreciate that skill that you have.
Yeah, I that was a learned skill. I I am a lot more direct, and I think some of that comes, with just being in progressively higher leadership
Hmm.
positions. But again, I went into psychology because again, I find human beings fascinating, and I want to help
Yep.
people, as most psychologists go into. And so you tend to be, which fit my personality, tended to be in a more, sort of listening, reflective. I am bossy, sort of by nature, but my family would probably be listening to this and saying, "Are you kidding me?" But I did, I was in a more sort of reflective,
Hmm.
listening space coming out of
Yeah.
training, right? And then you start to, and when I first started out in OD, organization development, I was a
Hmm.
practitioner, and so I I was still in that more kind of listening, reflective kind of
Mm-hmm.
space. Once I became a manager, and then particularly when I became a leader, I realized that there's a side of myself that I need to
Mm-hmm.
sharpen, which is being comfortable having difficult conversations, having to talk with people about things that aren't comfortable for
Yeah.
me. They were certainly not going to be comfortable for
Yeah.
them. But one of the things, again, all have mentors in our lives, um, and a boss and mentor of mine said, feedback is a gift. And sort of the first time I heard it, I'm like, sure it is. Like a gift that I would like to return, or re-gift
You can
to
keep that
someone
gift. I don't
else.
want it.
Um, but but then she followed up the second part of that to say, if you really do care about somebody, you will give them
Mm-hmm.
feedback because they cannot get better if they do not know what they
Mm-hmm.
did, that they could do better.
Absolutely.
And so, like, that part hit me. And I was like, you're right. Because I've tried telepathy on my husband for years, and it is a terrible form of
Not
communication.
working for you, huh?
So I know he was like, we're still working on it. Um, but you can't, somebody does not know that there's something that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing, not like who they are as a person. Again, that's for psychologists to deal
Mm-hmm.
with, but they can't do something different if they don't know that what they
Mm-hmm.
did should be being done
Yeah.
different, right? So that like really transformed the way that I sort of the lens I look through as I thought about, what, I love this person, or I care about this person, or um, if the tables were turned and I was doing
Mm-hmm.
X, God, I would hope someone would say something to
Mm-hmm.
me, if for from an intervention standpoint. So that's like stuck with me from the beginning, of going into being a manager, and so I've just taken that with me, and again tried to sharpen that sword over time to get more comfortable with having what end up being some tough conversations, and sharing with people things that can be
Yeah.
uncomfortable to hear. So, but again, I, I that that was um, that is part of psychology
Mm-hmm.
training, right? Because you really are not just agreeing with
Yeah.
people and saying, yes, I'm sure, everyone in your life is doing all of these bad things to you. You're gonna ask questions, and you're gonna hone in on, oh, interesting, when you said
Mm-hmm.
this. So that phrase from a boss mentor, plus reflecting back on, okay, I wouldn't sit
Yeah.
passively in a therapy
Yeah.
session and just take the person's word for everything. We're going to have a dialogue about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm going to push, and I'm going to question, and I'm going to be open enough to also receive feedback myself, or receive questions
Mm-hmm.
myself. So those things combined sort of hit me, to then again, to develop a skill, which I think is, it's not the easiest one to hone.
Yeah, it takes time, right? But I think, as you said, as you rose higher and higher in different leadership positions, you got more and more opportunities to practice that, right? And it became more and more necessary. So
Yep.
that's something
Yeah, for
that
sure.
sharpened as through necessity, right? And I think so. I mean, that's one of the
Mhm.
things that I really appreciate that you do really well. Jill, it's been such a great pleasure talking to you, and we could go on and on and on. I know for hours. Uh,
We certainly
so
could.
we'll definitely have to have you
Hopefully
come
we'll
back,
write you
right? I
back.
think you definitely have to come back because there's so much more I want to ask you about. But Jill, how do people get a hold of you? If people want to, lean on your wisdom and your experience, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, for sure. So certainly I'm on LinkedIn. Anybody can message me there. And feel free to, you're welcome to my email address, jill.draime gmail.com. So feel free to message me and message me through LinkedIn, message me on email, and happy to have more conversations about, I think, more conversations about this
Mm-hmm.
topic, because I really do think that psychologists bring a perspective that is unique. And I hope that any budding psychologists who might be listening to this see that there's a
Mm-hmm.
path that they might not have thought about. I didn't think
Yeah.
about it in graduate school. It was like there was one path. There's plenty of paths in
Mm-hmm.
psychology, but in my head, there was one path. And I'm glad my horizons were opened. And I would say, would love to dig a little bit deeper with anybody in terms of, if you're a
Mm-hmm.
leader out there listening to this podcast, um, have a psychologist near you, around you, on speed dial, on your leadership team, because they can just, I think we psychologists can bring a
Mm-hmm.
perspective. It's not, psychology is a science. It's not squishy. It's not fluff. It's not feel
Mm-hmm.
good. It really is a science that helps you get the most out of the quirky little human beings that are working for all of us.
Could not
So,
have said it better.
um,
Thank you so much. And so the last thing, Jill, we have you here, and you are an expert, especially in being a leader. So, what tip would you give to those leaders out there who are struggling or who are thinking, how can I do better?
well, so besides get a
Mm-hmm.
psychologist on your leadership team, so I would say, I think again, psychologists are in a very unique position to provide coaching to at we're very astute at observation, very astute at understanding human behavior and the human psyche. So I would say, if for leaders who um, you know who are struggling, get a psychologist on your
Mm-hmm.
team. And seek out. I think psychologists are particularly well positioned to be executive
Mm-hmm.
coaches. And I think executive coaching for anybody, whether you're struggling or not, is an investment well
Yeah.
spent. So, in terms of your own understanding of self and how to use self as an instrument. Ernest, that is a great podcast, Self as Instrument. Because really, I mean, that's what we bring to
Yeah.
work, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, and all the things that have happened to us, and all the people that we are. So, really understanding as a leader how to use
Mm-hmm.
yourself to get what you're looking
Mm-hmm.
for in your workplace. Um, and invest in yourself through doing some
I love
coaching.
that. I love that advice, right? Because you can't always control others, but you can control yourself, right? And you can better yourself. And so
What
that's
can you can
that's that's
control?
absolutely a great way. Coaching is a great way of sharpening yourself, especially if you're a leader and have to help other
Agreed.
people. So that's really great advice.
Yep.
So we're going to leave it there, Jill. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I had so much fun, and we will absolutely have you back.
Well, good. And if you want, Ernest, you and I like finish each other's sentences. So happy to come back and be on the show. Any kind of help and support you need, because I think getting the word out about the power of having psychologists in your
Mm-hmm.
workplace. I feel super passionate about it. So anything I can do to promote that, let me know.
Awesome. And for our listeners, thanks for listening, and we hope we will see you again soon. Bye now.